I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Brenda Patterson standing in my driveway with her clipboard, her lips pressed into that familiar thin line of disapproval. My name is Samuel Dawson, and I had just moved into the Oakridge Heights subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona, 3 months ago. The house was perfect, a mid-century modern with clean lines and a decent yard. The neighborhood seemed quiet enough, mostly young families and retirees. I worked remotely as a software developer, so the peaceful atmosphere was exactly what I needed. But I should have known better when I saw the words HOA Managed Community on the real estate listing. My buddy Tom had warned me about HOAs, told me stories that sounded too absurd to be true. I figured he was exaggerating. "Mr. Dawson," Brenda said, not bothering with pleasantries. She was probably in her late 40s, with blonde hair that looked like it had been set with industrial-strength hairspray. She wore a white polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on it, which she seemed to treat like a military uniform. "I need to discuss a violation with you." I had been washing my car, a 2023 Toyota Tacoma that I had purchased just 2 weeks ago. I loved this truck. It was voodoo blue, a striking color that shimmered between blue and purple depending on the light. The dealer had told me it was one of their most popular colors, and I had fallen in love with it immediately. "A violation?" I asked, turning off the hose. "What kind of violation?" She flipped through the papers on her clipboard with the efficiency of someone who did this regularly. "Your vehicle color is not in compliance with the HOA guidelines, Section 12, Paragraph 4. All vehicles parked in driveways or visible from the street must be in neutral, subdued colors. This includes white, black, gray, silver, beige, or tan. Your vehicle is blue." She said the word blue like it was a profanity. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I laughed. "You are joking, right? This is a factory color from Toyota. Thousands of people drive vehicles this color." "Not in Oakridge Heights, they don't," Brenda replied, her expression never changing. "I am the HOA president, and it is my responsibility to ensure all residents comply with our community standards. You have 30 days to remedy this situation, or you will face fines of $100 per day. Remedy the situation. What do you expect me to do, repaint a brand new truck? That is one option. You could also park it in your garage where it is not visible from the street, or you could sell it and purchase a vehicle in an approved color." She said this as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. My garage was currently full of boxes I still needed to unpack, but that was beside the point. "This is insane. I read through the HOA rules before I bought the house. I don't remember seeing anything about vehicle colors." Brenda's smile was cold. "It is in the supplementary guidelines, which were updated last year. All residents were notified by email. Perhaps you should check your spam folder." She tore off a copy of the violation notice and handed it to me. 30 days, Mr. Dawson. I suggest you take this seriously. We have successfully placed liens on properties for less egregious violations." She turned and walked back down my driveway, her sensible shoes clicking on the concrete. I watched her go, still holding the violation notice, water dripping from the hose onto my shoes. This could not be real. But as I looked down at the official-looking document in my hand, complete with my address and a photo of my truck, I realized it was very real indeed. I went inside and immediately started digging through the HOA documents I had received at closing. The main rulebook was about 40 pages long, covering everything from lawn height to fence specifications. I found Section 12, which dealt with vehicles. It mentioned that inoperable vehicles, commercial vehicles, and recreational vehicles could not be parked in driveways. There was no mention of color restrictions. Then I found the supplementary guidelines, a separate document that had been added as an addendum. Someone had gone through and added dozens of new restrictions, including the one about vehicle colors. I checked my email and found the notification, sent 11 months ago to the previous owner's email address, which had been forwarded to me but had indeed ended up in my spam folder. The subject line read, "Important HOA updates," which could have meant anything. I spent the next hour fuming. $100 a day would add up to $3,000 a month. That was absurd. I had just bought this truck. There was no way I was repainting it or selling it because some power-hungry HOA president did not like the color. The next morning, I decided to drive around the neighborhood and see if anyone else had vehicles that might be in violation. What I found made my blood boil. At 2847 Seguero Drive, the HOA president's own house, sat a 2008 Ford Explorer that looked like it had been through a war. The entire front bumper was missing, exposing twisted metal and plastic. The rust was so extensive that the original color was barely identifiable, though it might have once been red. The vehicle sat in the driveway, fully visible from the street, and looked like it had not been moved in months based on the dust and debris accumulated around the tires. I pulled over and took several photos with my phone, making sure to capture the address number visible in the frame. This was unbelievable. Brenda Patterson was threatening me with daily fines over a factory color on a new vehicle, while her own car was literally falling apart in her driveway. I also noticed a bright yellow Camaro at another house, a red Mustang 2 streets over, and several other vehicles in colors that definitely were not on the approved list. Either Brenda was selectively enforcing the rules, or she had just started cracking down and I was the first target. That afternoon, I called the HOA office. A pleasant-sounding woman named Rita answered. "Oakridge Heights Homeowners Association, how may I help you?" "Hi, my name is Samuel Dawson. I received a violation notice yesterday about my vehicle color, and I had some questions." "Oh, yes," Rita said, her tone becoming slightly less pleasant. "What questions do you have?" "Well, first, I wanted to understand how these rules are enforced. Are all residents subject to the same standards?" "Of course," Rita replied. "The HOA board reviews all properties regularly to ensure compliance." "That is interesting," I said, "because I noticed that the HOA president's vehicle appears to be in violation of several rules. It is missing a bumper and covered in rust." There was a pause. "I am not sure what you are referring to." "The Ford Explorer in Brenda Patterson's driveway. It is clearly inoperable or at least not roadworthy. Section 12, paragraph 2 states that inoperable vehicles cannot be parked in driveways." Another pause, longer this time. "I will make a note of your concern. Is there anything else?" "Yes. I would like to appeal this violation." "How do I do that?" "You can submit a written appeal to the HOA board. We meet on the first Tuesday of every month. Your appeal would be heard at the next available meeting, which would be in 3 weeks. I thanked her and hung up. 3 weeks was cutting it close to the 30-day deadline, but it would have to do. I spent the rest of the afternoon writing a detailed appeal, including photos of Brenda's vehicle, the other non-compliant vehicles in the neighborhood, and my argument that the rule was unreasonable and possibly unenforceable. Over the next few days, I did some research on HOA law in Arizona. I learned that while HOAs had significant power, they were still bound by state law and their own governing documents. They had to enforce rules consistently and could not selectively target individual homeowners. I also found several cases where homeowners had successfully sued HOAs for unreasonable restrictions and selective enforcement. I joined a few online forums for people dealing with HOA issues and was stunned by the stories I read. People being fined for having the wrong color flowers, for hanging Christmas lights one day too early, for parking their own car in their own driveway. It was like discovering an entire underground world of suburban tyranny. 1 week after receiving the violation notice, I got a knock on my door. It was a man about my age, maybe early 30s, with a friendly face and a baseball cap. "Hey, are you the guy with the blue Tacoma?" "That is me," I said. "I am Jake Morris. I live 3 streets over. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Brenda hit you with a violation for your truck color." "Word travels fast," I said. Jake laughed. "Oh man, you have no idea. Brenda is notorious. She has been HOA president for 4 years and she has gotten progressively worse. My wife and I got a violation last year because our mailbox was the wrong shade of black. We had to repaint it 3 times before she approved it. That is insane. Tell me about it. But here is the thing. A bunch of us have been talking and we are pretty fed up. There is supposed to be an HOA election this spring, but Brenda keeps postponing it, claiming there are not enough candidates. We think she is just trying to hold onto power." "That does not sound legal," I said. "It probably is not, but nobody has really pushed back hard enough. Most people just pay the fines or comply because it is easier than fighting. But your situation, with her own car being a complete wreck, that might be the ammunition we need." Jake and I talked for another 20 minutes. He told me about other residents who were unhappy with Brenda's leadership, including a retired lawyer named George Hendricks, who lived on the other side of the subdivision. Jake promised to set up a meeting with some of the other homeowners who might be interested in pushing back. 2 days later, I found myself in George Hendricks' living room with 6 other homeowners. George was in his late 60s, with white hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His wife brought out coffee and cookies while we settled in. "All right," George said once everyone was seated. "Let us talk about our HOA problem. Samuel, why do not you start by explaining your situation?" I told them about the violation notice, showed them the photos of Brenda's vehicle, and explained that I had filed an appeal. The other homeowners shared their own stories. Jake and his wife, Emma, had dealt with the mailbox issue. A woman named Patricia Chen had been fined repeatedly for having decorative rocks in her yard that were apparently the wrong size. Another couple, the Johnsons, had been threatened with legal action for painting their front door a color that was allegedly not pre-approved, even though it was on the approved color list in the original HOA documents. "The problem," George said, leaning back in his chair, "is that Brenda has consolidated power. She has been president for 4 years, and she has filled the board with people who just go along with whatever she wants. The treasurer is her friend Margaret, and the secretary is her neighbor Susan. They rubber stamp everything she proposes." "What about elections?" I asked. "Supposed to happen every 2 years for all board positions, but she keeps finding reasons to postpone or claiming there are not enough nominations. The last election, she ran unopposed because she convinced the other candidate to drop out." "How did she do that?" Emma asked. George's expression darkened. "She found violations on their property and threatened them with thousands in fines unless they withdrew from the race. They had just had a baby and could not afford to fight, so they backed down." "That is extortion," I said. "Probably, but proving it is another matter. And even if we could prove it, who wants to spend thousands on lawyers to fight an HOA? We spent the next hour strategizing. George suggested that we needed to do several things simultaneously. First, document everything Brenda was doing, especially instances of selective enforcement. Second, Organize enough homeowners to demand a special election per the HOA bylaws. Third, prepare to take legal action if necessary. The bylaws state that if 20% of homeowners sign a petition, we can call for a special meeting and a vote of no confidence, George explained. There are 83 homes in this subdivision, so we need at least 17 signatures. I think we can get that. Everyone agreed to start reaching out to neighbors they knew were unhappy with the HOA. I left that meeting feeling more optimistic than I had since receiving the violation notice. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening at the community center, a small building near the subdivision entrance. I arrived 15 minutes early with my printed appeal documents, the photos of Brenda's vehicle, and a notebook. The community center was a plain room with folding chairs and a table at the front where the board members sat. Brenda was already there, arranging papers and looking very official. Margaret, the treasurer, was a heavy-set woman with curly red hair. Susan, the secretary, was thin and nervous-looking, constantly adjusting her glasses. There were two other board members I had not met, both middle-aged men who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. About a dozen other homeowners trickled in, including Jake, Emma, and George. Brenda looked surprised to see so many people. Usually, I learned later, only one or two homeowners showed up to these meetings. "All right, let us call this meeting to order," Brenda said, rapping her knuckles on the table. She went through the standard opening procedures, reading the minutes from the last meeting and reviewing the financial report. Then she got to new business. "We have one appeal to consider tonight," she said, her tone making it clear she did not expect this to take long. "Mr. Dawson is appealing a violation for his vehicle color. Mr. Dawson, you have 5 minutes to present your case." I stood up and walked to the front of the room. "Thank you." I received a violation notice for my truck, which is apparently not an approved color according to the supplementary guidelines. I am appealing this violation for several reasons. I laid out my argument methodically. First, the color restriction was not in the original HOA covenants that I had reviewed before purchasing the property. Second, the supplementary guidelines had been added without proper notice to all homeowners. Third, and most importantly, the rule was being selectively enforced. "As evidence of selective enforcement," I said, pulling out the photos, "I present these images of the HOA president's own vehicle, which is missing a front bumper and covered in rust. According to Section 12, Paragraph 2, inoperable vehicles cannot be parked in driveways. Additionally, I have documented at least 4 other vehicles in the neighborhood with colors that are not on the approved list, none of which have received violations." I passed the photos to the board members. Brenda's face flushed red. "My vehicle is none of your business," she snapped. "Actually, it is," I replied calmly. "If you are going to enforce HOA rules, you need to enforce them consistently, starting with yourself. Your vehicle is clearly in violation, yet you have not issued yourself a citation." Meanwhile, my brand new truck, which is in perfect condition and happens to be a factory color from a major manufacturer, is somehow a problem. Margaret and Susan were looking at the photos with uncomfortable expressions. One of the male board members, whose nameplate identified him as Robert Chen, Patricia's husband, cleared his throat. "These are pretty damning photos," Robert said. "Brenda, why has your vehicle not been cited?" "That Explorer is not inoperable," Brenda said defensively. "It runs fine." "It is missing a bumper," I pointed out. "That makes it not street legal in Arizona. A vehicle that cannot legally be driven on public roads is, by definition, inoperable." George stood up. "I move that we table the discussion of Mr. Dawson's violation. until the board conducts a comprehensive review of all vehicles in the neighborhood to ensure consistent enforcement. That is not how this works, Brenda said. We are here to rule on his appeal. Actually, George replied, any board member can make a motion and it has to be voted on. That is in your own procedural rules. I have made a motion. It needs a second. I second, Robert said. Brenda looked furious, but she was trapped by her own rules. Fine, all in favor. 3 hands went up, Robert and the other male board member, and surprisingly, Susan. Margaret hesitated and then raised her hand as well. Brenda was the only one who voted against it. Motion carries, George said with satisfaction. In the interest of fairness, I also move that all violation notices currently under appeal be suspended until the comprehensive review is complete. Robert seconded again, and the vote went the same way. Brenda looked like she wanted to flip the table over. Is there any other business? She asked through gritted teeth. Actually, yes, George said. I would like to discuss the upcoming board elections. According to the bylaws, elections should have been held 6 months ago. When can we expect them to be scheduled? We have not had enough candidates, Brenda said. Then let us open nominations right now. I nominate Samuel Dawson for HOA president. I second, Jake called out. I had not been expecting this, but I was not going to back down. I accept the nomination, I said. Brenda's face went from red to purple. You have only lived here for 3 months. You do not know anything about running an HOA. I know how to enforce rules fairly and consistently, I replied. And I know how to treat people with respect. That seems like a good start. Several other homeowners were nominated for various board positions. By the end of the meeting, we had a full slate of candidates, many of whom were people who had been quietly unhappy with Brenda's leadership for years. Brenda scheduled the election for 6 weeks out, the earliest date allowed by the bylaws. As everyone filed out of the community center, she pulled me aside. You are making a big mistake, she said quietly. You have no idea what you are getting into. Is that a threat? I asked. It is advice. This HOA needs strong leadership, not some newcomer who thinks he knows better. What it needs is fair leadership, I said. There is a difference. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood transformed. George, Jake, and I organized a campaign, going door to door to meet with homeowners and explain what we were trying to do. We created a simple platform, emphasizing fair enforcement, transparent communication, and focusing on rules that actually mattered for property values and quality of life. The response was overwhelming. Person after person told us stories about Brenda's petty tyranny. One elderly couple had been fined because their lawn was a 1/4 inch too tall when they were out of town caring for their sick daughter. A single mother had been threatened with legal action because her son's basketball hoop was 6 inches over the height limit. A veteran had been cited for flying an American flag that was allegedly too large, even though federal law protected his right to display it. We compiled all of these stories, documented every instance of selective enforcement we could find, and put together a presentation for the next board meeting. We also discovered something interesting. Brenda had been using HOA funds to pay for a management company run by her cousin, at rates significantly higher than comparable services. George, using his legal background, filed a formal complaint with the HOA board alleging financial impropriety and demanding an independent audit. This lit a fire that we had not anticipated. 3 days after George filed the complaint, I came home to find that my truck had been keyed. Someone had carved the word snitch into the driver's side door. I immediately called the police and filed a report. The officer who responded was sympathetic but realistic about the chances of finding who did it. "You have any security cameras?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, "but I am definitely getting some now." That evening, I installed a complete security camera system with cameras covering my driveway, front door, and both sides of the house. The system uploaded everything to the cloud, so even if someone destroyed the cameras, the footage would be saved. 2 days later, the cameras caught Brenda walking past my house at 2 in the morning. She did not do anything, just walked by slowly, looking at my truck and my house. It was creepy and clearly intended to intimidate me. I downloaded the footage and sent it to George. "This is harassment," he said when I showed him. "Document everything. If she keeps this up, we can get a restraining order." The day before the next scheduled board meeting, Margaret, the treasurer, called me. "Mr. Dawson, I think you should know something. Brenda has been pressuring me to hide some financial records. She does not want the audit to happen." "What kind of records?" I asked. "Payments to her cousin's management company, mostly. But also, there have been some expense reimbursements that I am not sure were legitimate. Expensive dinners, conference fees for events I do not think she actually attended. I went along with it because I did not want trouble, but this has gone too far. She keyed your truck, did not she?" "I do not have proof," I said carefully. "I know it was her. She was bragging about it to Susan. She thought it was funny that she was teaching you a lesson. Would you be willing to testify to that?" There was a long pause. "If it comes to that, yes, but I want protection. I live in this neighborhood too." "I understand. Thank you for telling me." I immediately called George and then the police. The officer I had filed the original vandalism report with called me back within an hour. "If you have a witness willing to testify that Miss Patterson admitted to the vandalism, we can pursue charges, but I need to talk to this witness directly." I connected him with Margaret, and things began moving quickly. The police opened an investigation into the vandalism. George also informed them about Brenda's middle-of-the-night walk past my house, which, combined with the vandalism, could constitute a pattern of harassment. The HOA board meeting that Tuesday was packed. Word had spread that something big was happening, and nearly 60 homeowners showed up, filling every seat and lining the walls. Brenda looked nervous for the first time since I had met her. George started things off. "Before we begin regular business, I need to address a serious matter. Evidence has come to light suggesting financial impropriety and personal misconduct by the HOA president. I am formally calling for an emergency vote to remove Brenda Patterson from her position, per Section 7 of the bylaws, which allows for removal of any officer for cause with a 2/3 vote of the board." "This is outrageous," Brenda sputtered. "You cannot just—" "Actually, I can," George interrupted. "It is right here in the bylaws. Would you like me to read the relevant section aloud?" Robert stood up. "I second George's motion. Brenda, I have been on this board for 2 years and I have watched you abuse your power over and over. The situation with Mr. Dawson's truck was the last straw, but it is just the latest in a long line of problems." "I have done nothing wrong," Brenda shouted. "I have dedicated years to this community. You dedicated years to making people's lives miserable," Patricia said from the audience. "You turned the HOA into your personal fiefdom." George presented the evidence methodically. The financial irregularities, including the inflated payments to Brenda's cousin. The documented instances of selective enforcement, with the photos of Brenda's own vehicle compared to the violations she had issued to others. Margaret's testimony about being pressured to hide records. And finally, my police report about the vandalism along with Margaret's statement that Brenda had admitted to it. The room was silent when George finished. All eyes turned to Brenda. "You have anything to say in your defense?" Robert asked. Brenda's face was white. "That truck was an eyesore." Someone had to take a stand for community standards. "So you admit to vandalizing Mr. Dawson's vehicle?" George asked. Brenda seemed to realize she had just made a huge mistake. "That is not what I meant. I just meant." "I think we have heard enough," Robert said. "Let us vote." All in favor of removing Brenda Patterson as HOA president. 4 hands went up immediately. Robert, the other male board member whose name I had learned was David Miller, Susan, and Margaret. Only Brenda voted against her own removal. "The motion carries," Robert said. "Brenda, you are removed from your position effective immediately. Please surrender any HOA documents or property in your possession." Brenda stood up, knocking her chair over. "You are all going to regret this. I will sue every single one of you. Feel free to try," George said calmly. "Though I should warn you that we will be pursuing restitution for the misappropriated funds, and there is also the matter of the criminal charges for vandalism." Brenda grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The room erupted in conversation. Robert called for order. "All right, everyone, let us settle down. We still have business to conduct. First order of business, we need an interim president until the election. I nominate Samuel Dawson." I had not expected this. "I appreciate the nomination, but George has much more experience." "I think he would be a better choice." George shook his head. "I am happy to advise, but I am too old to take on the day-to-day responsibilities. You are the one who started this, Samuel. You should see it through." After some discussion, I accepted the nomination and was voted in as interim president. The board also voted to move forward with the independent audit and to suspend all pending violations until we could review the rules and ensure they were reasonable. Over the next 2 weeks, things got messy. Brenda did try to sue, filing a lawsuit against me, George, and the HOA board alleging defamation and unlawful removal. Her lawyer withdrew from the case 3 days later when the police arrested Brenda for criminal damage, based on Margaret's testimony and the evidence we had provided. The arrest happened at her house on a Wednesday morning. I was not there, but Jake called me immediately with the news. "Dude, you should have seen it. 2 police cars, they handcuffed her right in her driveway. Half the neighborhood was watching." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I had never wanted things to escalate this far, but Brenda had made her choices. The criminal case moved forward quickly. Margaret testified, the police presented the evidence, and Brenda's own statement at the board meeting, where she had essentially admitted to taking action against my truck, was entered into the record. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been speaking hypothetically, but the jury did not buy it. Brenda was convicted of criminal damage and ordered to pay restitution for the repairs to my truck, which came to about $1,500 after the insurance deductible. She was also placed on probation for 1 year. The HOA election happened on schedule. I ran unopposed for president, largely because everyone knew I had already been doing the job. We also elected a completely new board, filled with people committed to fair and reasonable governance. One of our first actions was to review and revise the HOA rules. We eliminated the ridiculous vehicle color restriction, along with dozens of other petty rules that served no legitimate purpose. We established clear standards for what constituted a violation and created an appeals process that was actually fair. We also changed the management company, saving the HOA about 30% on fees while getting better service. The independent audit revealed that Brenda had misappropriated about $12,000 in HOA funds over her 4 years as president. The board voted to pursue civil action to recover the money. Brenda's homeowner's insurance ended up settling for $10,000 rather than go to trial. As for Brenda's vehicle, the one that had started this whole mess, It sat in her driveway for another month before finally being towed away. I later heard she moved out of the neighborhood entirely, selling her house and relocating to another city. I could not say I was sorry to see her go. My truck, once repaired, looked as good as new. I made sure to park it prominently in my driveway, a daily reminder that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when they have a clipboard and a title. The neighborhood transformed over the following months. Without the constant threat of petty violations and arbitrary fines, people relaxed. Yards that had been maintained to obsessive standards became more natural and personal. A few people painted their front doors in colors they actually liked. Someone even put up a purple mailbox, just because they could. We had monthly neighborhood barbecues, which became surprisingly popular. People who had barely spoken to each other for years started forming actual friendships. Kids played basketball in driveways without fear that someone would measure the hoop height. It felt like a real community instead of a prison camp. George became my mentor and good friend. He helped me navigate the complexities of HOA management, teaching me which rules actually mattered and which ones were just busy work. The goal, he told me one evening over beer in his backyard, is not to control people. It is to maintain property values and prevent genuine nuisances. Everything else is just petty tyranny. Jake and Emma had their second child, a daughter they named Sophie. At the hospital, Jake joked that he was going to paint his house pink in her honor. "Just kidding," he said when Emma glared at him, "but I could if I wanted to. That is the beauty of it." Patricia Chen started a neighborhood garden club, which I joined despite having a black thumb. It turned out I was terrible at gardening, but I enjoyed the social aspect. We met every other Saturday, working on various projects around the neighborhood. Patricia taught me how to identify common desert plants, and I learned that the things I thought were weeds were actually native flowers. Robert Chen became my vice president on the HOA board. He was detail-oriented and good at handling the administrative tasks I found tedious. Together, we made a solid team. His wife, Patricia, served as the secretary, and we recruited a local accountant named Michael Sanders to be treasurer. Michael insisted on transparent financial reporting, publishing detailed quarterly reports that any homeowner could access online. About 6 months after Brenda's departure, I got a letter from her lawyer. She was requesting that her conviction be set aside or reduced. The request was denied. She also tried to appeal the civil judgment, but that went nowhere. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had lost her job over the conviction, which I genuinely felt bad about. But then, I remembered the smug look on her face when she had handed me that first violation notice, and my sympathy faded. One of the unexpected benefits of the whole situation was that I became something of a local celebrity in HOA resistance circles. I started getting calls and emails from people in other neighborhoods dealing with similar situations. I could not help everyone, but I connected them with George when legal advice was needed, and I shared our story as a roadmap for others. A local news station even did a story about our HOA transformation. The reporter, a sharp woman named Linda Torres, interviewed me in my driveway with my blue truck prominently featured in the background. "This all started because of a paint color," she asked. "It started because someone abused their power," I corrected. "The paint color was just the catalyst." The real issue was an HOA president who forgot she was supposed to serve the community, not rule it. The story aired during sweeps week and got a surprising amount of attention. For about 2 weeks, I could not go to the grocery store without someone recognizing me. Most people were supportive, sharing their own HOA horror stories. A few people thought I was a troublemaker who had destroyed a woman's life over a petty dispute. I tried not to engage with those folks. The story also caught the attention of the Arizona legislature. A state representative named Jennifer Gonzalez reached out to ask if I would be willing to testify in support of proposed HOA reform legislation. The bill would require HOAs to enforce rules consistently, provide better notice of rule changes, and create a state-level oversight board for HOA disputes. I testified before the state legislature on a Tuesday morning in Phoenix. I told our story, emphasizing how easily HOAs could become tools of harassment in the wrong hands. I showed photos of Brenda's vehicle next to mine, which got audible reactions from several legislators. The bill passed committee and eventually became law, though in a somewhat watered-down form. Still, it was progress. Through all of this, I never forgot that I was just a software developer who wanted to live peacefully in his house and drive his blue truck. I had not set out to become an activist or a community leader. But sometimes life pushes you in unexpected directions, and you have to decide whether to resist or embrace it. I chose to embrace it, at least for a while. I served as HOA president for 2 years before deciding not to run for re-election. I had accomplished what I set out to do, transform the HOA from a tool of oppression into an actual community organization. Robert ran for president after me and won easily. He continues to do an excellent job, maintaining the fair and reasonable approach we established. These days, I mostly focus on my work and my hobbies. I took up hiking and discovered that Arizona has some incredible trails. I joined a local rock climbing gym and made new friends who had no idea about my brief stint as an HOA reformer. I adopted a dog, a rescue mutt named Cisco who loves riding in the truck. My house has become exactly what I wanted when I bought it. A peaceful retreat where I can work remotely, enjoy the Arizona sunshine, and live my life without someone constantly looking over my shoulder with a clipboard. The boxes in my garage are finally unpacked, though now the space is occupied by hiking gear and bike equipment. I still see Margaret occasionally at neighborhood events. She apologized profusely for her role in enabling Brenda, and I told her I did not hold it against her. She had found the courage to speak up when it mattered, and that took strength. She moved away about a year ago, taking a job in Tucson. I wished her well. Susan still lives in the neighborhood but keeps to herself. I think she feels embarrassed about her part in Brenda's regime, even though she ultimately voted to remove her. I tried to reach out a few times, but she made it clear she wanted to move on and forget about the whole situation. I respected that. The house that Brenda used to live in was bought by a young couple with twin boys. They painted the front door a cheerful yellow and planted colorful flowers in the yard. The first time I drove past and saw kids playing in what used to be Brenda's front yard, I smiled. It felt like the final chapter of the story, the bad energy replaced with something good. My truck, now a few years old, still runs perfectly. The voodoo blue paint still catches the light beautifully, and I still get compliments on it regularly. Every time I wash it in my driveway, I think about that first violation notice and how close I came to just giving in and parking it in the garage. I am glad I did not. George passed away last year, peacefully in his sleep at age 72. The whole neighborhood turned out for his funeral. I gave a eulogy, talking about how he had been the backbone of our successful fight against HOA tyranny. His wife thanked me afterward, saying that George had been proud of what we accomplished together. She moved to Oregon to be closer to her daughter, but we stay in touch via email. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Brenda and wonder how things might have gone differently. If she had just been reasonable, if she had enforced the rules fairly, if she had remembered that being HOA president was about serving the community rather than controlling it, none of this would have happened. She would still be president. I would just be another homeowner and everyone would be going about their lives. But that is not how it played out. Her need for control, her petty vindictiveness, her belief that the rules applied to everyone except her, all of that led to her downfall. It is a cautionary tale about what happens when a little bit of power goes to someone's head. I am proud of what we accomplished. We stood up to a bully, we reformed a broken system, and we created a better community in the process. It was not easy, and there were times when I wondered if it was worth the stress and conflict. But seeing how the neighborhood has thrived since then, seeing people actually enjoying where they live instead of living in fear of the next violation notice, I know it was worth it. The story spread beyond just our neighborhood and even beyond Arizona. I have received emails from people as far away as Florida and Washington State, telling me their own HOA horror stories and asking for advice. I always respond with the same message. Document everything. Find allies, know your rights, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. Some battles are worth fighting, even when they start over something as seemingly trivial as a vehicle color. Because it is never really about the vehicle color or the mailbox shade or the lawn height. It is about whether we are going to let petty tyrants control our lives, or whether we are going to stand up and say enough is enough. I chose to stand up, and it changed everything. Not just for me, but for an entire community of people who were tired of living under someone else's arbitrary rules. We proved that change is possible, that communities can govern themselves fairly and reasonably, and that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to say no. My blue Tacoma sits in my driveway as I write this, gleaming in the Arizona sun. It is more than just a vehicle to me now. It is a symbol of resistance, of standing up for what is right, of refusing to back down in the face of unreasonable authority. Every time I see it, I am reminded that ordinary people can make extraordinary changes when they find the courage to fight back. The HOA still exists, of course. It always will, as long as the neighborhood exists. But it is a different HOA now, one that serves the community instead of ruling it. We maintain common areas, enforce reasonable rules about actual nuisances, and generally stay out of people's way. It is what an HOA should be, a helpful organization that makes the neighborhood better, not a weapon used to harass and control. I never expected to become the face of HOA reform when I bought that blue truck. I just wanted a vehicle I liked in a color that made me happy. But sometimes that is how change happens. Not through grand plans or dramatic gestures, but through ordinary people standing up for simple, reasonable things. Like the right to park a factory color vehicle in your own driveway without being threatened with hundreds of dollars in fines. Would I do it all again, knowing everything I know now? Absolutely. Despite the stress, the conflict, the vandalism, and all the hours spent in meetings and writing appeals and organizing neighbors, I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Because at the end of the day, we made our neighborhood a better place to live. We took power away from someone who was abusing it and created a system that actually works for everyone. And I still have my blue truck.